Happy Halloween. In celebrating the original traditional fall festival, I bring you yet another vignette. Today we're playing with object source lighting. But first, we need to find and print a suitable model. Again, I turned to MyMiniFactory and found this free model, which I enlarged on the slicer to get a figure up from 28mm scale to something closer to 72mm scale. And even going from a small tabletop figure to something like a larger sculpted figure or a bust size figure, I still managed to break the lantern off during the painting process. Since this is my first time trying my hand at object source lighting, I started just by laying down some base colors. For the rider, whom I dubbed Pumpkinhead, I chose this color scheme of the German Hessian mercenaries from the American Revolutionary War, which I remember as light tan pants with a green and red trimmed coat. And so this is what I painted. The horse is called out as a nightmare in the description, so I used a very dark purpley black mix and a fiery mane and tail blazing orange. And the horse leathers and the saddle, they were also painted in traditional colors. I used the field gray on the blanket, the horse blanket, and just another leather color on the saddle. So the mane and the saddle were all used speed paints, and the rest of it all used standard acrylics. And now the fun starts. There seems as many ways to paint object source lighting as there are painters, as every painter has his or her own way of doing this type of painting. What I chose to do was to lay on a heavy covering of an ivory black oil paint, thinned way down, but not to a wash, but much thinner than for direct painting. So somewhere in between a wash and a thin paint for painting. I painted the paint over the entire model, the horse and the rider. Obviously not the lantern because that was pinged off someplace. I had to go find it. And I let the paint dry for 20 to 30 minutes. And then I came back in with a thinner soaked paper towel and a cotton bud to remove the dark paint from where I thought the light would fall from the lantern. And it was easier to paint this without the lantern in place, but I had to keep coming back to my primed model pictures to remind myself of the lamp's orientation and where the light may or may not fall. Then I let that whole thing dry for 3 to 4 days before I added a protective layer of a matte finish, which removed the shine and gave the supplicant painting something to stick to. It didn't turn out as dark as I thought it would be, so maybe my next attempts I'll leave the oil painting on a little less thin to get higher contrast with lit and unlit areas, or maybe I'll try a whole different technique. So after letting the dull coat dry for a couple days, it was time to add a little more brightness back to the lit areas. What I did is I took some yellow paint, acrylic paint, and thinned it down to a glaze-like consistency using acrylic medium instead of water. And I chose to do it that way because yellow is a very hard color to cover. It's very translucent, and I was afraid if I mixed it down too lightly, I would break the paint and I would just get watery yellow water, not paint. What I try to do is just strike the highest points. For the base, I used a new to me acrylic earth texture paste. It's what they call desert sand. It dries rock hard with lots of texture, but it still looked way too yellow for me. Even if I was to use it as a straight up desert sand color, I think I still would have to paint it some other color. And since I was only looking to try out a new product and was planning to paint over anyway, I first did a gray primer, and then I came back with the airbrush and sprayed a dark a dark earth color. After all that dried, I came back to my speed paints and used hardened leather as a heavy wash. I'm finding more and more that's how I like using these paints, as washes and tints rather than actual paints. I went back to Thingiverse this time and I found some pumpkins in a file labeled Pumpkin Patch Pumpkins. Surprise. They were printed out, primed, painted, dull coat of matte varnish for protection, and then I super glued them to the pre-painted earth color, and then laid on several layers of static grass, and then added the pumpkin-headed Hessian on his nightmare mount to the base, to give me my version of a ghostly Hessian that's still haunting the pumpkin patches on Halloween. To celebrate the season of fall, and I hope everyone has a happy and safe Halloween wherever you are.